Thank you, everyone, for the invitation to be with you today. This is my first Presbyterian Women meeting. I'm so excited about that, and also to learn more about this new study, what my grandmothers taught me. As I've thought about that, I've also been thinking a lot about my own grandmothers, and one of them in particular was very special to me. We visited her a lot, and I was her only granddaughter. So she had a way of making me feel quite special and very loved. She taught me a lot. Among other things, she taught me how to sew and to make some very special desserts that our family enjoys. But she also taught me how to appreciate fine glassware and china and how to set a pretty table for special occasions. She used to take me to her china cabinet and show me one covered vegetable dish in particular. She would talk about it, talk about the people who had owned it. I knew it was very special because it had come down through the generations of women in her family. I was never allowed to touch it, but from the time I was little, she told me, this is going to be yours someday. I think that was because she wanted to make sure that I had a connection to these women who had meant so much in her life. So I wasn't very surprised really when I got the dish, because she had written on the bottom of it in a piece of tape for Patty. And this is the dish, actually. It's just an old white china dish that has pink flowers on it. But what surprised me was what I found inside the dish, because I didn't think there was anything in there. There was a stack of old photographs, really, really old ones. And I didn't recognize the people who were in those pictures. But Graham had written their names and some information about them on the back and on the sides. And the names I did recognize, because those were the women she was talking about when she mentioned them, when she told me all these stories about the dish. And I thought I would share a few of those pictures with you. Let's see if I can. All right. So this first picture is Cora Shipman Pew, and she was the original owner of the dish. I don't know exactly when she was born, I think around 1870. So we can guess that the dish is probably turn of the century or a little bit before that. This picture is Grandma Shipman and then her sister Lizzie. They had a lot of meals together, I guess, where the dish was used to serve food to everyone. This is my Graham's mother, my great-grandmother. Her name is Ivy Marie Pew Walk, when she was a young lady, very stylishly dressed. This is actually my Graham when she was a toddler. She looked so happy, dressed in her best for a picture. I love this one in particular because it has 4 generations of the Pew Walk women sitting on a porch. My Graham's the one here in the front holding her daughter, my Aunt Nancy. So here is a whole group of these women who are my grandmothers and ancestors. And then finally, this is my Graham in the 50s. She's dressed up and ready to go to a conference in New York City for an organization she was a part of. This was a very, very proud time in her life. And it's nice she chose this picture of herself to include. So those are the women whose pictures were in there. And I don't think it was an accident that I found those pictures there, because she wanted to be sure that I knew whose hands had held and used that dish. And whether I knew it or not, they were part of shaping who I am, because she was so important and had such a great influence on me. They were, by the way, all of those women you saw, Presbyterian women, long legacy of Presbyterian faith. So I feel connected to all of those women that she didn't want me to forget. All of them are my grandmothers. So as we come to the time to light the Christ candle this morning, I invite you to remember a picture of a grandmother or a mentor or someone who's very important in your life, a woman who came before you, who taught you, as I share some words from a song called "These Are the Women I Come From." It's written by Bonnie Keene and Tori Taff. If you do a search on YouTube, you'll be able to find it, a performance of it. I found it a long time ago, but whenever I read these words, I think of the pictures, or when I look at the pictures, I think about this song. So I hope you can imagine someone. I saw some of you have pictures on the wall behind you when we were logging on. Maybe there's someone there in that group. But see if you can imagine one of those old photographs of a woman who's been important in your life. And think about these words. They are faces in photographs, heads all held high, not afraid to look life in the eye. They were women with backbone, keepers of the flame, with a spirit even hard times couldn't tame. And I know this same blood is in me, and I meet their gaze one by one. Eyes strong and clear, I still feel them near. These are the women I come from. The faith that sustained them is bred in my bones. I know what I'm made of and where I belong, as these are the women I come from. And the life force inside them is still going on, because these are the women I come from. I'm so grateful for all of them, as I'm sure you are, for those who came before you. As we light the Christ candle this morning, let's see if I can get this going for us. As we light the Christ candle, I hope that you will join me in prayer. Creator and still creating God, we give you thanks for the wisdom of others, for the people who inspire us, who teach us, shape us, love us, and help us to become the individuals you intend for us to be. Help us to receive the full legacy of grace, justice, and acceptance that comes from knowing you and all that you want us to understand about the life you have given us, and to make the circle that is our family of faith even wider. We know that the light of Christ, symbolized by this candle, cannot be extinguished so long as it lives in each of us. Help it burn bright in our time together today and in all our days ahead. Amen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Cody F Miller, who is the artistic creator for the Horizons Bible Study, what my grandmothers taught me, learning from the women in Matthew's genealogy of Jesus. Cody F Miller is a mixed media artist who resides in Columbus, Ohio. He works with magazine collage, acrylic paint, and charcoal. The patterns and odd configurations he stumbles upon are an integral part of conveying the endless layers of humanity. An old 1885 second grade reader or letters from a father to his son during World War II are collected and stored for the next piece. The scriptures, the writings of Thomas Merton, and the music of Tom Waite are all important influences in Cody's work. They are ingredients in creating, as Ben Meyer says, a horizon of this dark world where we glimpse the starting first glow of dawn, the surprising appearance of grace out of the depths. Metaphors, analogies, and other related devices are used to convey beauty that often comes disguised as a loss, failure, or unwelcome change. Miller's work has been shown in numerous exhibits, such as Havana Connect Art in Montañas, Cuba, the best of 2019 at the Ohio Craft Museum and the Springfield Museum, solo exhibits sojourners at the Haley Gallery in New Albany, Ohio, in close proximity at the Cultural Arts Center. From the familiar to the unfamiliar at the Ohio Art League, Glory Be at the Johnson Humoric House Museum, and annual acquisitions at the Viewpoint Gallery in Schenectady, New York. He is represented by the Hudson Gallery in Sylvania, Ohio. Miller received an Ohio Arts Council Individual Excellence Award in 2002 and 2018, the Collector's Award for Excellence at the Ohio Craft Museum's The Best of 2019, Jurors' Choice 2D Award at the 2018 Columbus Arts Festival, Best of Show in 2001 and 2012 at the Westerville Arts Festival. Cody was the art instructor at United Cerebral Palsy for 16 years and is currently a resident artist at the Goodwill Art Studios. It is my pleasure now to present Cody F. Miller. Cody.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me out. If anybody has any questions while I'm talking, it actually goes much better with some questions from time to time because I can go off on some serious rabbit trails. So just feel free to break in. So there's a story in the Old Testament about, well, it's mostly the story of Jeremiah, and it's you know, for 40 years he's basically given the same message, and the message is you need to turn back to God. You've forgotten your first love. And that message just goes over and over and over again. And I think so when you fast forward later on in Jeremiah and you start to see like the sections of the periods of time where the Babylonian captivity takes place and they're being exported out of their homeland. Jeremiah says some really beautiful things that always resonate with me, and they're kind of serve as a backdrop for everything that I create, everything that I make. And, you know, he says, you know, you're going to be living in captivity for, you know, not a couple of years like the false prophets are saying, but it's going to be 70 years. You know, and then he says, and this is what I want you to do. I want you to get married. I want you to grow gardens. I want you to have children. I want you to live victorious in exile. And I just think that that is so incredibly beautiful as a message to think about, you know, when you read the daily news and you think about the things, the people around you, and even think about things in your own life. And there's just times where it feels like exile, but Jeremiah gives us this amazing, beautiful message of what it looks like to live this victorious, beautiful life, you know, and this, you know, as scarred and broken as we might be. So that's kind of the underlying thing for how I approach all of my work. And so there's often a kind of a combination of there's a certain playfulness in what I make, and also sometimes a certain sadness that I feel resonates with a lot of people, at least in terms of the customers that buy my work and emails I get from all over the world. And I really like the process of how I create, because yeah, I think it kind of mimics life in a lot of ways, where I'll have this kind of rough chicken scratch sketch of of my ideas of what I'm going to make. And then I'll often find, well, I'll have the collection of all these things of, you know, different cut paper and paint and patterns. And I'll often find something that works better than my original intention. And I love when that happens, because it's just this kind of like, I had this kind of plan in place, but I've learned to kind of, there's a Henry Nouwen book where he talks about, you know, living life with open hands, about this thing of like really having this loose grip on the creative process, where I have this thing where, but at the same time, it's like, dear Lord, Holy Spirit, you know, please guide and direct me, help me to be honest. That's the main thing. It's like, help me to be honest. And sometimes that's awkward, and that's okay. But the thing is when that chain reaction starts to happen with something better than my original intention, and it just goes out from there. There's a certain spontaneity and gut level approach to the process that I really, really like. So I don't know what else, like I could just talk about a bunch of stuff, but I don't know how long you want me to talk or what you want me to talk about specifically. If there's anything else, if there's any questions, I'll open it up right now.
I was looking at the picture of that you created of Tamar, and I was wondering if you could tell me, that's somebody that I never really, I don't want to say thought about or knew about. I know that Beyonce's sister is named Tamar, but after that, that's all I know. So how did you decide on what she looked like, I think?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know about all you, but I remember the first time reading that story, you know, I was in college, and I just thought, like, wow, that's jacked up. But then, you know, over the years when I read it and I think about it, it's like, you know, of course, women had so little power or influence or much of anything at that time. And when you look at what she needed to do for her place in society and a number of other things, it's like, well, yeah, that totally makes sense. There's a line from a movie where this guy is doing a presentation before this government of this idea what they do to try to get these hostages out of Iran, and it was a really bad idea. And you know, these generals are looking at him, they're like, "What? This is what you have for me?" And he goes, "This is the best bad idea that I have." You know, and I think that a lot of times in life, it's like, this is the best bad idea that I have, and when you look at it, it's like, yeah, it makes sense. And I with the image itself, I wanted to infuse a little bit of the humanity of it, but also a little bit of this kind of look in the face of like, what, looking at the viewer, looking at you, looking at me, of like, don't judge me. And it's just, you know, this thing of like, you don't know what I'm going through. You don't know my history. You don't know my background. All you see is the tip of the iceberg here. So yeah, so that's a good question. Thank you.
I was looking at your what you did for Mary, with Mary and Joseph and the baby in the bed. And that, it just makes me so happy, because we never want to actually make them real people,
right,
with full lives like us. We want to, and you've got I don't know if they're pillows, but they're also evocative of those halos, like turning them into saints. And you've got real life saints, you know, right there, flesh and blood, with the joy of being a human being. And it's just so gorgeous. I just wanted to tell you that.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind of you. So both of my boys are much older. One's 21 in the Marines, and the youngest one's 18. But I don't know, you probably all have memories of just lying in bed with your child or with somebody you love, and maybe you woke up early and you're just sitting there and you're watching them breathe in this certain way that they breathe, you know, in a certain way that their chest moves. And it's just, you know, in that moment you're like, oh dear Lord, Thank you so much for this moment. Yeah, so I was thinking about that one day when they were really young, and they all snuggled up and we're just lying in bed early in the morning, and I was just like, I don't know how I stepped into this, but thank you. Yeah.
Hey, Martha, did you have pictures that you chose?
No, just from my head on that one. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
yes,
do a lot of sketching of faces, and I'm always sketching stuff. My wife gets angry at me because anything laying around, a bill, whatever, it's free game. And so yeah. So yeah, so I'm always taking in information, just like I've taken in lots of information of all your faces and the different lighting of certain things, and I'll probably do some sketches on that.
So Cody, could you talk about the pieces that I picked out that I'll share on the screen while you talk about them?
Sure, yeah. Do you want to share one now, and then I'll chat?
So this is the rebels.
Yeah, so this is called God's Rebels, and this is the 3 Hebrew midwives. So let me fast forward from that scripture to a scripture in Acts when it talks about Tabitha, and it's like 1 or 2 lines, and it talks about how she takes care of widows and orphans, and then boom, it's gone, right? I love that story of Tabitha because it's us, right? We're doing these things, and hopefully we're being the hands and feet of God and conveying God's grace to a world that so desperately needs it. But it's behind the scenes. It's under the radar in a lot of ways. And so with the 3 Hebrew midwives, when you read that in Genesis, the crazy thing is like historians could figure out who the name of the Pharaoh was at that time, but we're not given the name of the Pharaoh during that time in Genesis. I'm sorry that I'm getting mixed up. Anyways, we're not given the name of the most powerful person in the world at that time, but we're given the name of the 3 Hebrew midwives. These people that are, within a caste system, or if you want to call it that, they're pretty low, but their names are given and they're marked in history above the most powerful person in the world. So that's the first reason I did that image, because I thought that was so profound. The second thing I did the image is that from time to time, God honors people for lying in civil disobedience. The third reason another aspect of this image is that a lot of times I'll put birds in work, and you won't see it so much in this one, but like in some of the other ones, there'll be birds with like little pieces of string or yarn in them. And that's just a metaphor for these little sections in our life that we have for the next part of the journey. It's kind of like Frodo going to Mordor, where he doesn't have this detailed map that takes you all the way there, some GPS device. It's just this little section of how to get to this next part of it. And I love thinking about that when I create, and I think about my own life, and I'm sure you all have really amazing examples of that, where a certain direction that you want to go, but you don't know exactly how to get there, and you don't know if you will actually get there. But then you think about just the amazing amounts of beautiful people that God has put in your life from that point to this next point, and then from the next point to the next point. So I love having these birds with little pieces of string, like they're kind of going ahead of you, and they tie it to one part of a branch of some tree, and they go as far as they can until the string runs out, and then then it's gone. And that's your next section of the journey. So it's just kind of a metaphor. So there's a lot of collage in the front and a lot of drawing. I do a lot of drawing and painting kind of mixed into the mixed media description. And I think that's the main thing I'd probably say about that one. Okay. So this next one is called Gleaning, and it really goes back to the thing of, if you think about each one of you in your life, and you start looking at your life right now, and you look at your life in the past, and you look at the few fish and the few loaves that you've given Christ, you know, and you start to see how God can multiply even the smallest insignificant thing if it's given with an open heart and open hands. I just love thinking about that. And so that's probably the emphasis of this image about if we give these small things to God in that attitude, what can be done in this world and through our own lives. So that's the woman in the back with the butterflies coming out of her head, and it's this metaphor of just this life-giving thing. So like right after I get done with this, I serve at a food pantry every Saturday for the last 7 years, and we always get a chance after I load them up just to say, hey, you want prayer for anything? And just the dialogue is just, it's just amazing. And often too, it's very humbling because often that week, man, sometimes I'm just an absolute train wreck for that week, and I just have nothing to give. And yet sometimes God really pulls back the curtain and lets me see, you know, like, I feel like 80% of the battle is just showing up. And then from there, just constantly praying, Lord, just, you know, help me to convey your kindness in some way, even though every part of my being wants to go the other direction. So anyways, it's, you know, sometimes we can look back in our lives and we can see these things that we've done, and they might seem insignificant, they might seem small or even silly or embarrassing. And then somehow we see it transformed in some way that we could have never imagined. And it's so humbling and beautiful and poignant, that it just kind of leaves you awestruck. So anyways, that was what I was thinking about that one. And then again, this is the one with the birds and the string. And there's a lot of different spiritual formation techniques about with Lectio Divina and things like that, where they ask you to kind of fit your feet into the shoes of the person that you're reading about, and to really meditate on that, the sounds, what might be going through the person's mind, you know, the smells, what things might taste like, and meditating on that and being in that moment, and then allowing that to speak to you into your own life. So, you know, Mary's this young teenager, and she has this child in a way that can't be explained. And I just wanted to kind of show, like, when she's got her eyes closed, when Jesus is sleeping, I wanted to show just this kind of moment of like, it's like, I don't know what's next. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what this is going. I don't even know how to think about this. But God, you are enough. You're enough. And so it's you know, even if I'm only going to get enough string from these birds for the next city block, it's enough. So anyways, yeah, that's the main thing I want to say about that painting. So I don't know if I have much else to say, unless anybody else has any other questions. Thank you.
Cody,
Thank you for inviting me. Yes.
Cody, if we have for another, I'm interested in, did you have the text, or did they just give you the names of the women that were going to be featured? When to create your images?
Yeah, good question. All the images but two are already in existence. So the images take a long time. There's no way that if they would have told me, if they would have told me a year from now, hey, we'd like to do this, there's no way I would have the time. They take a lot of time. So the only two images that were the originals for that were Tamar and, oh my gosh, I've already forgotten her name. It's another small self-portrait, but the rest of them were originals that had existed prior to that request for this study. Yeah.
Cody,
Yes.
your painting of Tabitha lives in my house. I bought it when
I'm
we had
honored.
the
Thank you.
at Covenant, and I see her many times a day, and she just means so much to me, and speaks to me. And I think of you every day too.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm very honored that you would have something in mind in your Holy of Holies.
Aptly described. I looked at her for the several weeks that it was hanging in our lounge, and I kept thinking, she is calling to me. And finally, I said, I have to have her. I have to take her home with me. So thank you for painting her and sharing her.
She's inspired from a friend of mine named Zanib from Sierra Leone. Yeah.
I'm curious about your use of butterflies. Does it have a special significance to you? Oh, obviously it does. You use it.
Well, I mean, there's so many metaphors for when you think about our own lives and what happens for a butterfly to become a butterfly and just signifying life. And a lot of times, the butterflies, like there's a painting I did, Mother of Moses. A lot of the times they show up kind of behind the viewer. So again, kind of going back to what I was touching on earlier about a lot of times we do these things, we show up and everything, is kind of just a response to God's grace to us, but we don't know if it's making any difference. We don't know, if anything's really happening, but often there's so many things behind the scenes that are happening. And so often I'll use that as just a visual component to cue the viewer about that. Good question.
Well, Cody, we thank you for getting us started. And
Sure.
It makes me look at all of these creations in a whole different light. And I know that there's some shalom in there somewhere. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's nice meeting all of you.
Can read Katie's bio in the program, and so you can see she's an experienced teacher. She has introduced studies for the Synod Presbyterian women and is always ready to help Covenant PW Circle study leaders prepare to lead their circles in study. She has spoken and led worship for the Presbytery PW on a number of occasions. I will simply say that you are in for a treat today. Katie, it's all yours.
Thank you for that, Louise. Not grandmothers, surely, but the PW women of Covenant have been my mothers and sisters in the faith, women from whom I have learned, women by whom I have been taught. This study this year, this marvelous study, invites us to think about the ways that women in the genealogy of Jesus taught him. Indirectly, through the stories passed on, they are part of his becoming. And I am so excited to share this with you today. I'm going to share my screen with you so that I can show you a few things. There, I hope you can all see that well right now. What my grandmothers taught me, learning from the women in Matthew's genealogy of Jesus by Merrill Blair. Down here is my email. If you have any questions about anything that I've said today, please feel free to reach out. If you have more ideas, things you'd like to talk about, fabulous. Just email me. That will be a joy. There is also, if you go to YouTube, a video you can watch of Meryl Blair introducing her study. And of course, if you've seen it already in the Horizon study itself, there is a DVD set you can get with introductions to all the chapters. Each lesson begins with this beautiful, beautiful prayer. Would you pray with me, please? Creating and loving God, as we read your word together, may we allow it to read us. As we enter your story, may we understand our own stories with more clarity and wisdom. Help us to remember that you have always worked through the lives of ordinary men and women with all their faults and failings, people like us. We bring our ordinary lives before you today. Transform our expectations so that as we study stories of the past, we may be open to your extraordinary future. Amen. Martha spoke today of jagged edges, broken women. There are jagged edges all around us right now. We know that. And I myself feel broken almost every day in very real ways. And I can also tell you stories now of resilience and of grace. In the common way of looking at things, these women in the genealogy of Jesus are broken. And they certainly live in times and are held in situations that are jagged, death dealing, soul killing. And yet, God dwells in them with curiosity, with courage, and with power. And by having their stories read by us and taking our stories and putting them in relationship to them, we too can find creative, courageous ways to deal with the jagged edges and the broken places. The first lesson in this study is Family Trees, looks at genealogies and the people from whom we come. These are three of the women from whom I come: my grandmother, my Aunt Betty, and my mom. These women are inside me. Only my mom is still walking this earth, thanks be to God. She and Betty and Graham are in me. I hear their voices. I remember what they taught me and stories from their lives that inform who I am and give me wisdom for how to survive. I wanted to share here with you a poem that my Aunt Betty wrote on the birth of my oldest daughter, Abigail Evans, which is my grandmother's maiden name. Women talk different from men. Like in games, men talk about sports. Women get to the heart of the matter. Quietly, quickly, sorrows surface. Consolation cascades down. The beachhead of sisterhood established. Who in your life has shaped you and how? And beyond our biologic families and those families we create with our friends that shape us too, biblical characters are also in some ways part of our own personal family tree. The woman at the well, I know her. She is flesh of my flesh. Who is it in the Bible that you have learned from and been shaped by the same way that Syro-Phoenician woman in her interaction with Jesus shapes him forever in the most glorious, grace-opening, inclusive way? What stories do you tell yourself when you feel a need to remember who you are meant to be? What stories center ground inspire you? The questions in these lessons are gold, and they need you to sit with them. So I encourage you to do everything you can, even if it's maybe an email ahead of when your group meets with just the questions in it. Do everything you can to help the women in your studies feel like they have some time and space to be with these questions for a while. Maybe send one a day in the week before the study so that they can think about it in the shower as they're driving to pick up their kids from school, whatever it is. These questions deserve some time. This is a video link to Joni Mitchell singing Woodstock. It's a song that's mentioned in this first lesson, quoted, "We are stardust, we are golden, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden." It's a beautiful song. Please, when they give you these ideas in the lessons to connect with, search them out, particularly if we may be doing some of these studies over Zoom in the few months to come. Please remember to use videos and art and all the things you can to open up this time. In the suggestions for leaders that follows each lesson in the book, there is this one for the first lesson. Invite the group to research PW and denominational mission projects that provide defense and protection for the most vulnerable members of the human family. Consider supporting these efforts. This link that you could click onto here takes you to the Presbyterian Women's site, in particular, the work on human trafficking. The examples I'm going to give today come from human trafficking, in particular, the sex slavery of women, because that's my passion. Design the illustrations and the resources for the passions of your community. Genesis 38. It is true that most people don't know this story. It is tucked inside that narrative of Joseph. It's like, meanwhile, back at the ranch, there's this other story stuck in. This story, too, for me, is a massive game changer. It is absolutely gorgeous. It tells us not to judge. It tells us that when you get down to applying whatever code of ethics you have, the 10 Commandments, the Sermon on the Mount, when you get down to actually trying to live them out in the constraints and confines of a situation that you are in, it's not going to look pretty. Sometimes, I loved what Cody said, it was with the best, worst idea. Sometimes we just find a way through to survive with as much grace and beauty in it as we can. And it's hard and it's bitter. So Tamar was a woman without a husband. Judah, the father-in-law, was to make sure she was kept safe by including her in his family and giving him the next son to marry. He did not do that. And so Tamar takes matters into her own hands. She goes to the place where Judah was on a business trip, and she sits out there along the road, maybe near some kind of sacred site. There's an indication that it might have been that she might have been looked at as a religious prostitute. But she gets all dressed up as this prostitute. Judah sees her, wants to make a transaction, but left his money at home. He's only got his credit card, right? His staff, his signet ring. And so he gives her these things and say, well, you keep these, you keep my credit card, I'll come back later and pay you cash. So later, Tamar is brought before Judah as a woman who has sinned, as a whore, because she is visibly pregnant and unmarried. The consequence would be that she would be burned. she sends word to him and says, the father of the child owns these things, gives him his possessions back. And what does Judah say? But she is more right than I. People in power wield judgment, get to decide who is in, who is out, who gets the good stuff and who does not. People with things might look at, let's say, people in poverty, for example, and say, oh, you're not meeting my standards. You don't work hard enough in the right way to get help. And maybe we need to ask sometimes if the camera pulls back and God looks at the whole situation in all complexity. Maybe power needs to look around and say, she, he is more right than I. Consider a prayer for women who are abused or lonely or lack power and choice in their own lives. Consider something else. Consider offering a prayer of recognition, forgiveness, and absolution for yourself at that time in your life when you did the best that you possibly could, and yet you have judged it and found it lacking, and you've carried guilt and maybe even shame over it. Bless the fact that you did the best that you could, and give thanks to God for bringing you through and offering you a next. What symbols of constraints that limit your choices? What might it look like for you to put off those constrictions? Don't ignore, when you do this study, don't ignore those boxes that are stuck on the bottoms of some of the pages here. This one is about the Board of Pensions and the programs that they offer for clergy and others connected to the Board of Pensions. But the idea here is self-care. It's, are you making sure that you get what you need? Tamar had to be radically creative, to go outside the bounds of the normal in order to get her own needs met. Are your needs being met? What do you need to do to be on your own side, to take care of your own self and meet your needs? There's a challenge here in these studies of which I want you to be aware. We're being asked to apply that living word to our own lives, and that is deep, hard, and important work. Do not stop there, for we are also being asked to move beyond our privilege and our perspective in order to be transformed by our encounter with another. If we only make the move of seeing how we are like them, we are only using them. We're only engaging with them in a very limited way and being unwilling to see the fullness of who they are, a fullness that might offer a challenge to us that could save our lives, that could expand our vision, that could widen our hearts and make us more tender and powerful in the world. So in this chapter, we are asked to learn about some other people.
Dolores is an icon.
She's a civil rights hero. She's the first general that I followed into war.
She's not afraid to speak truth to power.
Dolores Huerta, who is an old friend of mine.
The FBI knew how dangerous Dolores was. Dolores came up with the slogan, "Si se puede."
Yes, we can.
You were a young girl growing up in America in the 40s. You must have had a dream.
After I had seen the miserable conditions of farm workers, Cesar Chavez said, we have to organize a union. You had this ambience all around you that you could really change the world.
was beyond question the largest gathering on behalf of farm workers in California history.
I wish they'd all go back to where they came from. We have no labor troubles.
She wasn't asking for permission. She just did what needed to be done.
She has such a firm belief in what she's doing.
We've never given up.
That she infects you with it.
Dolores Huerta.
90,000 people were poisoned in the fields of the United States of America.
Farm workers founded the whole idea of environmental justice.
Men were threatened by her power.
She's a very volatile individual. She's an insult.
People wanted to see her in a more traditional role.
I left a couple of my children behind.
That's part of the sacrifice that we made and that we had to make.
And it still pains me when I think about it.
People in power have no idea of the true heroes of this country.
I would not have been able to see what's hidden in the fields of our country without Dolores.
We're knee deep in sexism when it comes to why she isn't studied and why people don't know her.
Latina girls need to see statues of you. Really having set the record straight. I mean, women cannot be written out of history.
That was racism!
That documentary is available on Netflix right now. So if this works, if it doesn't work, somebody unmute and tell me, but this should let us open a link to something that I connect this study to. In Tamar's chapter, this might be relevant to you, but it could work in other units too. And that is Catch Court, the special docket in Franklin County that is designed to take women who have been arrested for prostitution, understand that they have been trafficked, and help them change actions to change habits to turn them from survivors into thrivers. In Franklin County, Ohio alone, approximately 1,200 women are arrested each year for solicitation. Rather than viewing a woman convicted of a prostitution-related arrest as a criminal, Catch views her as a victim who needs acceptance, commitment to a structured program, and the unwavering belief in her ability to transform her life from one of dependency to one of freedom. We might remember, we might notice that in this story, when Tamar is being dragged off to be burned, nobody says, oh, and where's the guy that got you pregnant, right? That's not a thing. Still, in our world today, it is often the women that are criminalized and arrested. And there is a John's Court to which I have been, but it's a different power balance. And one of the issues for John's Court is, how do you then offer healing and help to them rather than shame? Right? For all of us, how do we take somebody and apply restorative rather than punitive justice? All right, back to screen share. Where am I? Rahab. This is the woman who saves the spies who've come into the promised land. She says to them, to these men who are hiding in fear, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and the dread of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt in fear before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites that were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. As soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no courage left in any of us because of you. The Lord your God is indeed God in heaven above and on earth below. Rahab is a woman of courage. Now, one of the things that this study does really well is not allow you to be distracted by the main issue at hand, right? she's only got so much time to get these points across, and she's trying to keep your perspective on a story and see how the narrative is set up to make its point. So there is the point of the story, what it is constructed to tell you. But then there are also all these other kinds of questions that bubble up. And so when you go to lead these studies, you're going to need to be aware of them. Often a question that comes up is, what kind of God do we have? Do we believe that God sent the people into the promised land and told these people to kill everyone who was in it already? Is that part of the narrative that we agree with? This study is not about that, but these questions bubble up. And so I just want you to be aware of them, that they are here. And if they come up in your discussion, we need to honor them and maybe create another space where they can be engaged. A question here that this study asks, how can someone who sells their body for a living be righteous? What is righteousness? The Hebrew word is sadak, and it is entirely about relationship. In our parlance, we have taken righteousness as a sort of holiness, like somebody that doesn't do bad things. That's not the core value of righteousness. To be righteous is to be in right relationship with God and other people. It is not about keeping every jot and tittle of the law. It is about caring for the other, honoring, respecting, upholding, preserving the other. It is always about relationship. One of the issues that comes up in these studies is, what do we mean when we say prostitute? What do we mean when we say sex worker or sex slave or trafficked woman? We often don't have enough information in the story itself to say which of these that woman is, but it's an important conversation. Has this woman made a choice in her life, or has choice been taken from her? In the New Testament, when it says prostitute, I always myself insert the word sex slave. It is very likely that this woman was a slave who was earning money for someone else. In our world, there is an organization called Sanctuary Night here in Columbus. It's a drop-in center for women on Sullivan Avenue, creating sacred space for women still caught in cycles of prostitution in Franklinton. This is going to be open 24/7 as soon as they get the money for it. And if you go to sanctuarynight.com and see seat at the table, you could be involved in the fundraiser at the end of the month. It looks really fun. Most of it is outdoors. There are food trucks and other things. I'm going to be there. So is my daughter, Sarah. Hope to see you too. Also, please check out Freedom a la Carte. It is an catering organization with delicious food. It is a brick and mortar store on Spring Street, and it is an organization that provides training, jobs, and myriad sorts of support for women who have moved from being trafficked on the street to incredible, powerful lives. Ruth and Loyal Love. I want to give a shout out to Joan Chittister. She's got a great book on Ruth and Naomi that you might want to check out. There's also something called Uppity Women of the Bible, a video series by Living the Questions, and they have a great volume of it on Ruth. The one on Song of Songs is really good too. Just saying. So Ruth and Naomi, your people will be my people, your God shall be my God. Think of the women who support you. Maybe every day. What if we, for a week, we started our morning by calling up to mind the women who support us, bathing them in a golden light, blessing them with all our hearts and souls. Wouldn't we begin our day not only with gratitude to God for making and sharing such amazing women, wouldn't we also be strengthened and empowered, remembering who has our backs? Where do you experience chesed, or loyal love and commitment in your everyday relationships? In the scriptures, when God is described as a God of abundant and steadfast love, it is chesed. Where do you see that incarnated for you in this world? Ruth's actions in going out to glean reveal a world of poverty. Only the very poor needed to glean. It was possibly the ancient Near East's equivalent of dumpster diving. That's a quote from the study. Matthew 25, you had a slide up a little while ago, that this presbytery is part of the PCUSA's Matthew 25 initiative. 3 prongs to that: vital congregations, getting congregational vitality back so that our communities are alive in the world, dismantling systemic racism, and eradicating structural poverty. This link from the presbyterianmission.org will get you to Matthew 25 and poverty resources that are really valuable. We also want you to know, this will be in the PSV email on Wednesday, that you are invited to join us for a Zoom book study on Broke in America, Seeing, Understanding, and Ending U.S. Poverty. Kathy Bubb from Nurture and Outreach, a commission on which I also serve, is going to lead this, and you can register. Use this link right now if you'd like to register for this book study. Nurture and Outreach is the commission of the Presbytery, under which Presbyterian Women falls, also Matthew 25. So if you have any questions about Matthew 25, you can also contact me about those things. I thought this too was a powerful question from the study of Ruth. How do you feel about having economic refugees in Jesus's family tree? How does this impact your attitude towards today's migrants? This lesson would be a time for you to explore such things. There are 2 lessons on Ruth. The other one is Ruth and Redemption. This talks about Ruth with Boaz. Near the end of that story, there's this beautiful passage where Ruth comes to his feet and he covers her with his cloak. It's the same verb used for God covering us, the eagle wing or the mother hen wing of God covering human beings. It's also a sexually charged moment. And I thought this was really fascinating because this is from a medieval illumination of the same story. And if you notice in this story, Boaz sits up and says, Ruth, no, you are being inappropriate. That's the only version artwork of this story I've seen where Boaz is like, no, don't do that. I thought that was pretty funny. Sorry, just amusing myself. Now, Ruth is a Moabite. And we know from Deuteronomy 23 that Yahweh is said to have said that no Ammonite or Moabite shall be admitted to the assembly of the Lord to the 10th generation, because they did not meet the people of God with food and water on their journey out of Egypt. This idea that you do something and it's so bad you're cast out is challenged in the story of Ruth, because Ruth, the Moabite, is in the genealogy of Jesus. Outsiders are brought in. Constantly in our scriptures, if we're paying attention, there is this other narrative where the outsider is being brought in. And that story of only certain people get the good stuff is challenged again and again and again. Thanks be to God. With what can we replace Moabite to confront our own prejudices and assumptions? The issue of hospitality, of radical hospitality, also comes up in these stories of Ruth. Remember a time when you were welcomed despite being the other. How can we foster communities where nobody feels like the other? Make a list of hospitality do's and don'ts. Commit to nurturing actions that welcome the stranger. We are also a Vital Congregations presbytery. Reverend Amy House and I are the facilitators for Vital Congregations, which offers 7 marks of congregations, 7 aspects that we can all look at our own communities, see what we are doing, celebrate it, and ask the question of what next, what now, how might we become ever more faithful, ever more alive. This issue of hospitality comes up in 3 of the marks, actually: intentional, authentic relationships, outward, incarnational focus, and caring relationships. Bathsheba. I've only got like 3 minutes left. I got to do Bathsheba and Mary. Here we go. I love this story of Bathsheba, or as she is called in the genealogy and so often in the text, the wife of Uriah. That is who she is. That is why she's important. That is her status as object that gets acted upon in this narrative. In the history of our cultural narrative about Bathsheba and of our art, she is something to be looked at. She is an object of desire. The poor woman just goes up on the roof to take a bath, which is supposed to be a perfectly safe place. It just so happens that David's palace has an even higher roof, and he sees her there. 2 more artworks. David's here in this one too, but in this one, where Bathsheba looks back at the viewer, fits so perfectly with this study, because there she is looking back at you saying, I'm just taking a bath. What are you doing looking at me? Who are you to judge me? It happened at evening time that David rose from his lying place and went walking about on the roof of the king's house, that he saw a woman bathing from the roof. The woman was extraordinarily beautiful in appearance, and David sent messengers and he took her. That's what the Hebrew says. He took her, and she came to him and he lay with her. And she purified herself after her defilement. Then she returned to her house. This is from a book called Womanist Midrash by Wilda Gaffney. She argues David's ability to view her body is attributed to the size and position of the royal residence, and not to any temptation or solicitation on her part. Bathsheba is the object of David's vision, his interest, his curiosity, and his lust to acquire and dominate. Rape is not about sexual desire. And yet, rape is an abuse of power that can include relational and positional power in addition to physical power. The power dynamic here is clear. David uses his power to wield lethal violence to keep her, sees her, sends her, has sex with her without her consent. Me Too movement. It's hard to take King David, the prototype for the Messiah, and say these things about him. And yet, with every one of the people in this study, aren't we saying beautiful, mess, and sometimes we have to name the mess as violent, lethal, damaging, and wrong. After David has Uriah killed, a pregnant Bathsheba enters the home that David shares with 6 other women. Soon after her arrival, Bathsheba gives birth to a son who struggles for his first breath. When he dies, his death is placed squarely on David's shoulders as a penalty for his sin against God. The text never claims a sin against Bathsheba. That too is in keeping with the Torah, in which a crime is against a father or husband, but not the woman. Bathsheba isn't even a person in Nathan's famous accusatory rhetoric. She is a farm animal. And what does Psalm 51 say but David crying out to God, against thee, thee only have I sinned? That line has always driven me nuts. David sinned against Bathsheba. She was not simply an object owned by her husband, who was violated by David. She was a woman who suffered horrifically. Mary. She was engaged to Joseph. She was found to be with child. Joseph planned to dismiss her, but he subsequently took her as his wife. Each of these circumstances show Mary being acted upon. She is passive in each situation, and we have no sense of what she's feeling in the midst of the action. How does Mary's passivity show her vulnerability? Now, this is in the Gospel of Matthew. She is vulnerable, clearly. Remember, too, that Mary shows up in Luke. Going back to Matthew, we have the massacre of the innocents. When Mary and Joseph have kept Jesus safe in Egypt, but meanwhile back home, children around the age of Jesus, 2 years worth of babies are slaughtered. A voice was heard in Ramah wailing and sound lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. Mary must have felt for all those other babies. Aren't they all our children? We're also going to look in the study at Mary and the faith tradition of the church. Mary, this disciple who was able to achieve that state of learning to live within earshot of God speaking. In the Church Universal, she is often named Theotokos, God bearer. We are all the mother of God, for God is always waiting to be born, as Meister Eckhart shows us. And this God-bearing discipleship of Mary has its heart-searing pain. What are these women doing in a place like this? Issues of purity come up. At different times, the church has seen its role as one of protecting purity by excluding different groups. Have you been excluded? Have you excluded others because they were not pure enough? Jesus goes to school with the Canaanite woman. Please look that story up when you hit this session. One last point. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. We are here cracking up stories of others, and this TED Talk is absolutely brilliant on this issue. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male and female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus. And yet we live in this world with jagged edges. We are bodies made of stardust, filled with the breath of God, and we do not always honor that about ourselves or treat one another as if that were true. May this study help us confront that, challenge it, grow in it, be transformed, and be better at bearing the love and peace and power of Christ into the world. It's as fast as I can talk.
You did good, Reverend Katie. Thank you. As always, you brought all kinds of shalom out, and so we can continue to look at it within our Bible study.